Are you tired of lifeless, cold, and brittle digital mixes? This plugin claims to bring the warmth, texture, and analog flavor of a classic console. But does it actually deliver? Let's find out. This is the Sonimus N-Console, and it's inspired by the classic Neve 8014 console. Yet it has its own flavor and its unique settings to modernize it to fit our current workflow. Let's first start off with an A/B comparison to hear what this plugin is doing. I'm going to start with a basic mix, just level setting, no processing. So that you can hear the raw tracks simply gain stage by the plugin with adding some analog console flavor and then balancing with the faders. Let's take a look under the hood and see what this plugin is doing. By default, it loads into this mode, but if you're adding it to a bus, click this icon up here and switch between channel or bus mode. More on that later. For individual tracks, you're going to want to use the channel module. You got a VU meter here, giving you that visual feedback for gain staging and level setting. You can calibrate 0 VU to be anywhere from -26 to -14 dBFS, which determines how much headroom you have. That affects how hard you hit not just the console, but any inserts after, whether it's digital plugins, analog emulations, or even hardware inserts. If you follow strict gain staging, then you can dial in that 0 equals -18. Or if you're not worried about that, set your levels however you'd like. For me, I like structure. I don't want surprises later in the mix. So I like knowing where things are level-wise and how they're hitting my meters. And a quick side note that may help you. Here's where I used to get stuck. I would say, what about the snares, the hi-hats, the percussion, the transient heavy elements? They don't have a lot of low-end or RMS energy, so you would have to push the gain pretty considerably to hit 0 on the VU meter. And sometimes clipping the plugin and the channel. So I would just set the level to where it hits my peak meter at -10. In this case, with N-Console, I still like using the VU meter, so I'll calibrate it to get my signal to hover around 0, even if it's not exactly -10 on the peak meter. Now I'm going to show you how I gain stage my drums with N-Console. First, to get more of that console sound, I hit push and then warm. And this is going to reduce the dynamic range by simply introducing some soft clipping. It just makes things sound a bit louder and fuller. For most instruments, I also engage the saturation. On the N-Console, if it's set to in, by default, you get more of a modern saturation. But if you hit fat, you get more of that vintage sound of the 8014 console. I find that for kicks and bass and anything that already has sufficient low end in it, it just sounds bigger and rounder and just adds more thickness. Let's hear what it sounds like on kick and then on bass. Let's set the level for my kick, not just the individual channel, but as it relates to my mix bus. When I have my whole mix set and balanced, I want it to hit my mix bus at 0, which is -18. This is considered that analog sweet spot. And if an analog emulation console is the foundation of my mix, it's a good place to be. On the kick track, it's different than any other track in the mix because the kick is that anchor element, the loudest element in the mix. But I want to make sure that when my kick and my bass hit together, the two most powerful elements energy-wise in the mix, it's going to hit my mix bus at 0 VU. And to get my kick and bass balanced, I use the low end trick. To simply put, when setting levels for kick and bass when they're playing together, you're going to get a 3 decibel increase. On my kick track, I'm calibrating the VU meter and setting my input level to hit not just 0 on the kick track, but -3 on my mix bus. So I'm constantly going back and forth and checking while I'm doing the level setting. So when I add in my kick and bass, I know that I'm at the right level overall for my low end when on my mix bus, it's now hitting 0 when the kick and bass play together. Now, before I mentioned snares, hi-hats, other percussive elements are a bit tricky when using a VU meter. Let me show you why. If I set this hi-hat to hit 0 equals -18, which is what a lot of people will broadly recommend, here's what happens. You can either set the input level to where it reflects -10 on the peak meter or calibrate your VU to a lower number and adjust it so that it hits 0 on the VU meter. Here I have 0 equals -26. That's not peak though, that's average level. So on the peak meter, it's still going to register higher than what we get on the VU. So for any element in my drums that isn't a kick or a tom or a drum fill, anything that doesn't have a lot of low end energy or RMS energy, this is what I do. So next, click on the gear icon, which brings up this menu. Here we got trim as drive. Push the fader to get more of that analog console overdrive. The cool thing about this is that the output level is automatically attenuated. So as you increase the level, you're not going to be fooled by this big volume boost. All you get is that pure harmonic richness. Meter pre simply just places the meter before the saturation. Filters pre places the filters before and after the saturation. And here we have high cut and low cut filters with a smooth 6 dB per octave slope so that you can clean up your tracks a bit without using an additional plugin. This crosstalk section here allows you to select between vintage, which is a more obvious crosstalk, or modern or less audible crosstalk. So after gain staging, I then balance everything to get my mix sitting right with the faders. And then after the gain staging is done, I try not to look back. I set the balance and then I start adding my processing. Now let's talk about the bus module. I have my drums go into a drum bus where I can process my drums as a whole, and this is where I add the bus module. If you have your tracks grouped in the master grouping section, which I'll discuss in a minute, this here becomes grayed out. The bus module also has some predefined EQ settings that affect the signal being sent to the output saturation. We have master loudness and master bright. Let's give a listen to what these actually sound like. Now let's get into the master grouping section. On my mix bus, I'll put an instance of the N-Console on insert 1. I hit this icon here and select master grouping. There's two ways that you can go about doing this. You can either go to each channel module, for example, kick, snare, hi-hat, and group them to one fader in the master grouping section. But for me, I like to process my drums as a whole on the drum bus. So in N-Console, I'll group the drum bus and give the drum bus its own fader in the master grouping section. Why is this such a cool feature? Because you can control the volume and the saturation and the trim as drive in each group. So you can simply group everything. Here I have drums, bass, and instruments, which is everything not drum and bass. You can also do vocals, backgrounds, effects, whatever. Hit as drive and add some rich harmonics. The saturation buttons down here control the saturation for each group. Here we have a global saturation. Bypass all the saturation or keep it in and add some extra fatness. Let's see what this sounds like. So who's this plugin for? Obviously, anybody who's familiar with the sound of the Neve 8014 console and wants to have that inspired sound as a plugin in their DAW. But I think aside from how it could add some real noticeable enhancement to your tracks, it's a great tool for proper gain staging as well. And I know that this debate about gain staging is a hot topic on the internet. It's still a really important thing though to understand, and VU meters, in my opinion, are awesome and a great practice to implement in building a really strong foundation for your mix. So I'd say it's a fantastic tool for beginners as well. I use this plugin on pretty much every mix, and I stand behind how good it sounds and how it helps me and my workflow. And I believe that it can do the same thing for you. So if you want to try it, I provided a link for the Sonimus N-Console in the description. And if you like this video, leave a comment below, give it a thumbs up, and consider subscribing to the channel. I'd greatly appreciate it. And until the next one, may God bless you.